Indian polity. Indian Councils Act of 1909. The Indian Councils Act of 1909, also known as the Morley Minto Reforms, was an important legislation enacted during the British colonial rule in India. It was introduced by the then Secretary of State for India, John Morley, and the Viceroy of India, Gilbert Elliot Murrickin Mound, also known as Lord Minto. The Act aimed to expand the representation of Indians in the legislative process and make some limited provisions for Indians to participate in the governance of their country. However, it fell short of meeting the demands of the Indian nationalist movement, which sought greater political empowerment and self-rule. Expansion of legislative councils. The Act expanded the legislative councils at the central and provincial levels. It increased the number of elected members in the Imperial Legislative Council and the Provincial Legislative Councils, allowing for increased Indian representation. However, the majority of the members continued to be appointed by the British government. Separate electorates. The Act introduced the concept of separate electorates based on religious communities. It provided for the election of certain seats reserved for Muslims, Sikhs, Europeans, Anglo-Indians, and other minority groups. This move was a response to demands from various religious communities for separate representation. Limited franchise. The Act introduced a limited franchise for the election of Indian members to the legislative councils. The right to vote was based on property ownership, education, and other qualifications, which effectively restricted the electorate to a small portion of the population. Increased powers of legislative councils. The Act granted the legislative councils the power to discuss the budget and to ask questions of the executive government. However, the ultimate decision-making power remained with the Viceroy and the British government. Official majority. The Act ensured that the appointed members of the legislative councils held the majority, thus ensuring that the British government maintained control over the legislative process. The Indian Councils Act of 1909 was a significant development in the constitutional reforms during the British Raj. It marked a partial step towards involving Indians in the legislative process, but it failed to satisfy the aspirations of the Indian nationalist movement. The Act was criticized by Indian nationalists, who continued to demand greater autonomy and representation, leading to further demands for reforms in subsequent years. Thank you.